Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So, grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of KidLit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the KidLit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie, your KidLit loving host, inviting you back for another weekly conversation with a children's literature author. Today, I'm talking with Julie Falatko. Julie is the author of multiple books, and especially one of my favorite epistolary novels for kids and adults, I would say, Yours in Books. She's also the author of Snapsy the Alligator, did not ask to be in this book. It's received 4-star reviews, was featured in the New York Times, People magazine, and the Boston Globe, just to name a few. But she's here today especially to talk about her newest release, Help Wanted, One Rooster, a hilarious book on the power of being yourself and working together too. Julie, welcome to the KidLit Love podcast. I'm so glad you're here today.
I am so glad to be here, Stephanie. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. The pleasure is all mine. And while I can't wait to talk about your books, I do want you to talk about you. Have you always wanted to be a writer? And give us a little backstory on the journey from the beginning to right now, and hopefully name drop some of those wonderful titles of yours along the way.
Okay. Yes, I have always wanted to be a writer. I didn't realize that it was an actual job that I could do. So I've always written. I have a whole bunch of books that I wrote when I was 8 years old. But that, were just in journals and with crayon. And I did, because I didn't know any authors. I never had a school visit. I assumed that all the authors of the books that I love to read were dead or rich, and I wasn't either of those. So I just thought it wasn't an option for me. And then when I must have been 34 or 35, I found out that the mom of my kids' preschool teacher was one of my favorite middle grade authors when I was young, Ellen Conford, she has since passed on, but she wrote realistic middle grade novels that I just devoured. And one of them had a main character named Julie. So I've just felt like she must be writing about me. And then
Right.
I found out that she was the mom of the preschool teacher, and suddenly it clicked that I could be an author too. So I was in library school at the time, because it was like I knew I was like getting closer and closer. I was like, yes, something books. But then I started to get really serious about writing, which I had been doing all along, but not with the idea of being an author, because I just didn't know. And then I was like, well, I can do this. I can be an author. So just only a few more years later, after lots more writing, so Snapsy came out in 2016. Is that right? I've kind of lost track. I think that's right. Yeah. And I started really seriously writing in 2012.
Wow.
I think 2011, 2012.
I love that moment where you realized there was a possibility, right? Thank goodness you had kids who went to preschool and brought you to that moment.
Yeah. Right. Because I might have gotten there anyway, because it was also a sense of like, oh, wait, this is what I wanted all along. I forgot. And once I started really seriously writing and writing so much and reading so much. I mean, I was already reading a lot of picture books, and I've always read a lot of picture books. I mean, when I had extra money in college, I would go to the bookstore and buy picture books because
Yeah.
I love them so much. And looking back now, I'm like, why didn't I realize? Like, so somebody should have shaken me and been like, Julie, don't you see that this is what you're supposed to do? But that's okay, because we're all on our own path, and it took me to here. And I'm really grateful for the books that I have gotten out.
Yeah. Everything happens for a reason, right? So
Right.
you wouldn't maybe have not been able to come up with Snapsy and that
Right.
idea or something at that phase of life. So,
No,
oh, I love that. So you've always wanted to be a writer. Your books are funny. They are
thank
fun
you.
to read. They are quite an enjoyable experience. Have you always, first of all, well, I think you're funny because I've already been chatting with you before we hit record, but have you always been that kind of funny person, or do you enjoy reading funny books yourself, or how's that part of your journey fit in?
Yes, is the answer to your question. I mean, I think I'm funny, I mean, yeah, I've always sort of self-identified as a funny person, which is a tricky slope because maybe the people who self-identify aren't actually funny, but I think I'm funny, and I love reading funny things. And it's a harder way to write, I think, is to write something that's funny that makes people laugh, because it's hard to make somebody cry, but I think it's much harder to make somebody laugh,
Yeah.
because you make somebody, you're just like, here's somebody you love, now I'm gonna kill them, and then it's sad. But it's like to make somebody laugh is a much harder trick to pull off. And I mean,
Yeah.
it's the magical thing about writing anyway is that transference of emotion, which I'm a little bit obsessed with. But yeah, I love reading things that make me laugh,
Yeah.
for sure.
Well, and I think, you mentioned transference of emotion. I think what I love about your books, and this is something I learned, maybe I was 4. I don't know how old I was when I first read The Monster at the End of This Book by John Stone, but that book set the stage for a reading life where I expected books to speak to me. I expected to be involved and engaged and invested and leaned into the pages and so taken with what was going on in the story because of the unique way that it's structured and how it just kind of reaches out and grabs the reader. And that's what your books do, right? There are narrators and there are little side conversations almost, and there are letters, fun letters back and forth. Whatever element might be in each specific book, just that incredible connection to the book and that engagement with the reader, I think just comes so naturally in your books. And you say it may be hard to do, but hard reading makes easy reading, and it's a beautiful experience.
There is no higher praise you could give me than even to tangentially relate me to the monster at the end of this book. That book is a masterpiece. I feel like there's so many children's book authors where that is their origin story. It's
Yes.
either that they read The Stinky Cheese Man or it was the monster at the end of this book. I feel like that's how so many people got started, or maybe both of them. Um, but I think I mean, one thing that I think is so amazing about books in general, and I mean, not to just speak broadly about books, but especially when I'm talking about books for kids and talking to kids about books, and especially when there are those kids who don't like reading. Um, and I was a kid who loved reading and spent all weekend reading, and saw myself in so many books. And I feel like there's so many different kinds of books, and it's so I always tell kids, if you don't like reading, it's because you haven't found your book yet. And
Yes.
it is out there. Um, a while I want to say 2012, we put a little free library in front of our house, and there were all these kids there's still kids in our neighborhood, but it was like a different group of kids because now they're all adults. But all these kids came, and I tried to like curate this little group of books, one for all of them. And there was one boy, and he sort of stood back and he said, I don't like books. And I was like, all right, you wait, I'm going to find you a book. So then I sort of made it my mission to find this kid a book. And like, I kept putting different books in there and he kept checking. And maybe, I don't know, 6 weeks after we first finished the little free library, I heard him yelling and he was holding up a book and he was like, I found it. And it's here it is. It's my book. And it was like a vintage small engine repair manual that I had found on the side of the road, right? So I just thought it was cool. It had really cool illustrations in it, but it was like a textbook.
And that was the book.
That was the book. That was his book. And he it never got returned to the library. So I think he kept it.
Yeah.
Um,
I tell the kids that I work with as well, I still am. Right now I teach teachers about children's literature, but when I would work with students, I always loved working with the kids who either experienced difficulty reading, because then I could swoop in and show them some things to make reading come alive for them. But I loved, and it sounds like the challenge that you took on with that little boy too, I loved when I could match the right book to the right reader and then just watch that magic happen. I used to tell my kids, that's okay, books are patient, they're still waiting, we will figure it out, they're patient. So I can completely relate to that. And once they unlock it, once they realize that it is for them and there is a book that is just perfect for them, we got them, and then we can just keep feeding them books the whole time.
I mean, I certainly don't like every book. There's plenty of genres that I never read because they just aren't for me. It doesn't mean that they're bad. They just aren't for me. And as an author, I can't try to write for everybody. That wouldn't make any sense. So I just try to write the books that I liked to read when I was a kid and that I like to read now. And that's my lane. That's all I can do. And I can hope that there are other people who also like that type of book.
Yeah. So books that are immersive, books that are fun, books that are funny, that was your lane as a kid. And yeah, I love
Yeah.
that.
Or things like the monster at the end of this book, like you're talking about, where it was something that upended my whole notion of what a book could do. Like that
Yeah.
was so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why, especially in help, well, actually in Snapsy for sure, but in Help Wanted Run Rooster, it's just the way that you've written it and the elements, the reader I feel like I'm the fly on the wall, just listening in to this craziness that happens to be going on. It is so inviting. So let's go there. Why don't
Okay.
you tell readers, tell listeners, um, a little bit of the story of Help Wanted One Rooster, which I'm lucky enough to hold in my hands. Listeners can't see it, but I'll be flipping the pages as we talk about this book.
So there's two parts of this story for this story. The first is the story of the book. What is the book about? The book is about a farm where they are hiring a new rooster. There's a cow and she's interviewing rooster candidates, and they're all terrible candidates, and they get progressively more ridiculously terrible. And part of it is, why do they even need a new rooster in the first place? And what are they going to do with all of these horrible candidates? The other part of this story that I always wanted, that I've been waiting for years to talk about, is how long it took for this book to come about. When I told you, I think it was before we were recording, that or no, maybe it wasn't that. We were talking so much before we were recording, but when I started really taking writing seriously in 2011 and 2012, this book was one of the first ones I wrote. So I wrote this book in 2012. It got a book deal in 2014, and now is coming out 10 years later.
Wow.
Part of that was that it did not have an ending. Could not figure out why they needed a new rooster. So there were many versions where the rooster was doing all kinds of other things. He went to the big city and he was a rooster in the big city. He started a restaurant and he needed the cow to come help him run the restaurant. He started a rooster school to teach roosters not how to be a rooster, but how to be like the rooster they were meant to be. There were all these other endings. And it took 10 years to figure out the ending for this book.
So how did you figure out the ending? I know how it ends, and I won't
Right.
offer spoilers, but how did you figure out what you wanted to do?
Well, thank goodness for editors because it was through the work of my editors who sort of pushed me to consider what kind of farm is this? Like, is this a regular farm or like are they doing something else? Which they are. Uh, and I also got to we wrote the whole thing and I figured out the ending. And it was, I think it was 2021 maybe. And I suddenly realized that in the decade since I had first written the book, I had become a totally different writer. I'd become a better writer because I'd been working that whole time. So I rewrote the whole thing because it
Um,
felt like there was sort of a residue of my old writing in there. Which and it needed there were so many revisions in this book and they all needed to happen to get to this version.
wow. That must be something that I would think kids can appreciate because revising is hard
It
work.
is hard. And I always tell kids it's hard for me too.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
my writing process is the same as a kid's writing process.
Yeah. And you actually, because I did a little snooping around your website, of course, before we came on, and you offer advice and tidbits and for writers wanting to do this work too. So I really appreciate is appreciate the right word? The fact that you're saying it took that many years makes me think there's still hope for mine.
I am completely obsessed with the creative process. It's just, I think it's fascinating. I think it's so cool how differently we can all come at books and still a book results at the end. And it's that same thing of there's different books that I like to read and there's different processes. My process is completely different than another writer's process and still there's a picture book at the end and that's or some other kind of book. um and also my process from book to book changes and I just am endlessly fascinated by it. So yeah, I do have a newsletter where I talk about the creative process and like mostly also how to get writing done, and take yourself seriously and write the books that you are meant to write because I like I said before, I feel like if you write the books that you need to read, then they will end up, the more specific you are to your own weird book loves, the more universal your book ends up being, I think.
And then the right readers who need it next because that book has been waiting so patiently.
Yes. I love that about a book being patient. That's
Yes.
cool.
Yes. So in the story you mentioned they need a rooster and they have animals that are not roosters, interview for the position of being a rooster. And so, you have a a gosh, you've got a lot. You've got a I'm forgetting the animal with the bell, the chicken, right? Was that the
The,
chicken who
well,
rings the bell?
the first candidate is actually a rooster. He just doesn't want to cock-a-doodle do.
He
So
wants to press the
he's
bell. And
so it starts off with like an actual rooster. He just doesn't want to do the job. And then yeah,
and
then there's a chicken who's like kind of she's
you'd like to
adjacent.
pour some coffee to wake
Right.
everybody up
Right.
instead of ringing the bell. So all of these different animals, are attempting to do or wanting to attempt to do what the rooster does, but in their own way. And of course, the cow is just getting more and more frustrated, which is so fun for the reader to see. But the part that I love is after every interview or every candidate, the help wanted one rooster poster gets longer and longer. So help wanted run rooster. And then at the bottom taped on, must cock-a-doodle do, no bells. And then taped on, no coffee. And it just grows and grows and grows. And I think that's my favorite part is to watch the job description change as the candidates are coming and cow is just like, what is going on? It's perfect. I love that.
That was one of the things that stayed for all the revisions. That was always part of it, was that there was a sign that was changing. And I actually just built the sign so that when I do book events for this book, I have the sign and I'm going to add to it as I read it.
I love that. Talk about
I'm
an immersive experience. You are really bringing that to the readers. That's wonderful.
I mean, and it's always been sort of a funny part of this book because a huge part of it is like applying for a job, which kids don't know anything about. And like also there's a part where the cow has never interviewed anybody before, but she knows they need a new rooster. And so, I mean, if you haven't ever put out a job ad, you know that you may need to change it around as you get candidates and you realize, wait, I'm not being specific enough.
Right.
Um, I don't know. It's like some human resources humor for the grown-ups out there. I don't, not that I even have that much experience with that, but
Yes, though, because, on this podcast and my belief in my core as a reader, and I know in yours after talking to you that adults, I believe, should still read children's literature. And there are so many reasons why, but I think picture books, especially, they just lend themselves to these bounded experiences where you can just relax into a book and it's fun and it's enjoyable and it's beautiful to look at. And there's always a lesson that our inner child needs to know or that can apply to our adult life. And I was thinking that as I was reading this book, maybe not the human resources kind of humor, but just the idea of, who are we and what are we going after? And does it ring true to who we are? Are we willing to change that? Should we change that? Like all of those kind of identity questions were rolling around in my adult head, at least. That I think with a really great read aloud and conversation, kids will raise some big thinking too, because they always do. It's there, it's always there. So I really appreciated that for my adult reading heart too. And I won't give away the ending because we don't do spoilers so that readers will go get it. But oh, it just comes together so beautifully at the end. And that's all I'll say.
thank you. Thank you. Like I said, it took a while to get there. And I, I think I just maybe transferred all my thoughts to you because that was all those things you said about identity and who we do, what are we doing in the world, that stuff I think about all the time. So that was definitely on my mind while I was writing this book. And I love what you say about adults should read picture books. I totally agree. They are a really interesting art form. They are a poem. I love that a picture book can be a lifetime or it can be 10 minutes. It can be not a story at all, but just like a little bit of a feeling. Um, they're magical, and I feel so grateful that this is what I get to do.
Yes, I'm jealous for sure. I do want to mention because it's a picture book. I don't know if I'm going to say her name right, but Andrea Stegmayer. Is that how I say
I
it?
actually don't know how to pronounce it either. Um,
The illustrations are gorgeous.
they
They're
are gorgeous.
so beautiful.
I am obsessed with them. I love the color palette so
Yeah,
much. The
that's what I
way
was
she
going to
did,
mention. The backgrounds are beautiful
yeah,
and just
yeah.
contrast with those fun characters that, are random animals dressed in something else. It's just, they're gorgeous.
And it's one of those books where you'll see so much on repeated readings. Like every time you read it, you'll be like, I didn't even notice that was happening in the background. There's so much happening in the illustrations, like a whole other storylines going on. I love the illustrations in this book so much. They're gorgeous and they're hilarious. I love them.
Yeah, it definitely brings your message to life. I know it's so interesting to learn how authors are paired with illustrators and how that process goes. And it just boggles my mind that sometimes you might never ever meet, but you create this magical thing between your words and their pictures. And this is what happens. I'm fascinated by that entire creative process too.
I am too. It's talk about a magical thing where I write, a picture book manuscript is the most boring looking thing because it's
Yeah.
just like 3 pages double space in Word. And it takes such imagination and artistry for the art director and the editor to visualize what the illustrations can look like from all during the entire process, from when they first read it to then getting an illustrator and then guiding the illustrator through the process and making that match. Like, I have been so lucky with all of my illustrators. I've been so lucky because it's half the book or more even in some cases, and it makes the book the whole package of art that it is. And it's always such a cool thing to see it all.
Yeah.
um I'm somebody who doesn't really picture the illustrations very much. I mean, I have some ideas while I'm writing, but I don't picture them, which is really lucky actually, because then there's never any disappointment when I
Right.
see the illustrations. I'm always just in awe to see it come alive.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm always in awe of, you as an author have written multiple books, but those books are illustrated by different illustrators. And I am always in awe on how they capture that story, but also that theme and that mood, because the colors into this book and what's going on in the illustrations are very different than yours in books, right? Which is a different one. And so I just love seeing how that happens. And it usually it just looks so perfect, but I know there's so much that goes into it as well.
Every time I see a finished book and all the color, I always think I'm gonna redo my whole living room to be in this color palette. Like, it always looks so perfect and the colors are so cool
Yeah.
together and they always speak to me so much, and part of it is because it's usually illustrating my words, but yeah, it's
Yeah. Well, I think the color palette in Help Wanted Run Rooster would be a fine color for a house decor. They're beautiful how they all match. I
it's
agree.
gorgeous. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I know we've been talking about your picture books, but you do also have some middle grade work
I
too.
do.
Yeah. Do you want to talk
Yeah.
about that?
Sure. There are 4 books in a series called Two Dogs in a Trench Coat Go to School, which was so much fun to write. The story of 2 dogs who are worried that their boy is not having a good time at school. So they stack up and put on a trench coat and matriculate as a student in his school, and end up having a great time. They think school's going to be a horrible place, but it turns out to be super fun because there's meat in the cafeteria and lots of running around. So
Do you well, I shouldn't ask you this because it's like asking who your favorite child is. So I won't ask you which is your favorite to write. But is there a difference in your approach and how you write or the way the stories come to you when it's a picture book versus something that's more middle grade?
um I mean, the first time I wrote the chapter book manuscript, I felt like I was cheating because I could write so much. Where in a picture book, my first drafts are between 800 and 1,000 words, and then I cut to take out as much as I can. And with the chapter book, you can just like add in more, and then I'll get another idea and I'll be like, I can add it in. I can so that is super fun that I can be a little more long-winded, I
Yeah.
guess. And I can do there's a it's such an expansion of the process, especially when you're thinking about being funny and telling jokes. In a picture book, there's that beauty of the page turn for telling a joke, which I love using. And I love when I can like have sort of a callback to earlier in the book. But
Mhm.
in a longer book, you can really do more layers. You can't really do the page turns, but you can do more layers of callbacks, and you can build on a joke so that it builds and builds and builds, and then you can sort of have that big joke payoff in the end with some big scene that pulls it all together. That's super fun to write and work on.
Yeah. And the beauty of a really wonderful reading life is that you can read both picture
Yeah.
book, middle grade
Yeah.
novels, adult novels, all of the things. So we've talked about picture books, we've talked about middle grade. What are you working on now that you might be able to give us a sneak peek on?
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned Yours in Books because I have another epistolary novel, not
Oh,
novel,
yay.
epistolary picture book, not a novel, picture book, coming out in September. Chester Barkingham Saves the Country. This is about the president's dog, the president's daughter's dog, who sees the way that the legislators are working and realizes that they could use some lessons in maybe eating more snacks and taking more naps and running around more. So Chester steals some of the White House stationery and writes some memos,
Oh,
which he thinks they don't notice that it's written by a dog,
oh
but
my
he has
gosh, I
lots of
can't wait for that. I can't wait. Epistolary novels, books, they're just my favorite.
I love them too. And I'm really excited that I get to do a second one. And then I have a book coming out. It's actually in 2026 called Figdor Makes a Friend, which is about this sort of fussy little boy who's going to kindergarten for the first time. And his teacher tells him that he is going to make a friend and he thinks it's an art project. And he gets kind of stressed out about everybody else is working together and he's just like, I have to make this friend. What are you all doing? We can't get to the real learning until we make our friends. So
Oh my
that is,
gosh, that
yeah,
one sounds wonderful. That's going to be, mandatory read aloud for every first day of kindergarten and first
all
grade,
right. You
across
said
the
it.
board.
I'll hold you to that. You make it happen, Stephanie.
How to make a friend. Oh, I love that. I love that. And you said that was 2026. We have to wait a little
Yes.
bit, but it'll be worth
Yes.
it. Okay.
Yes.
So for listeners who want to find you online or find you on social media, where are the best places to find you there?
So I have a website, juliefalatko.com. I am only on Instagram and very sporadically. So you can find me there at Julie_Falatko, but you can't really find me there. And then I have a Substack newsletter where, like I said, I talk about creativity and how to get writing work done or any creative work done when you have all of these digital distractions is really what it ends up being about, because I've kind of gone on a little bit of a journey the last couple of years of realizing that I was very online and it completely killed my inspiration, and then sort of pulling back. And that's just me. That doesn't have to be how it is for everybody, but um
But
if
it's a lot.
you
It's like that for a lot of us, I dare to say.
yeah. So if that's you, maybe you'd like my newsletter. It's up to
Yeah.
you.
Well, I will put links to your website, the kind of I'm on Instagram, as well as the Substack, and I'll put links to the books that we've talked about, at least those that are available at the moment, in the show notes, so that readers, listeners can find them easily.
That's great. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. This was a fun conversation just about picture books, the power of reading, the power of having fun while you are reading. And I'm just so grateful you took the time out to come on today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm so excited that you asked.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. And listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of the KidLit Love podcast. And I will see you next week. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of KidLit Love. Thanks for listening.